Hello, professor and classmates. Today I am talking about the article Almost a Sense of Property, Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, Modernism and Commodity Culture by Guy Davidson. This is the organization of the presentation. First, I'll be sharing the thesis of the article, then the plot overview. We will discuss the concept of homelessness, the figure of the governess, the notions of property and authority in the text, this whole idea of the text being named almost with a sense of property, the governess novel in general, and how James provided like a new way to see that novel, how he broke with Gothic expectations, which is the following section, to finalize with the notion that the turn of the screw might be considered as proto-modernism. So keeping that in mind, we have the article thesis in which Davidson argues that homelessness is the founding condition of the turn of the screw. Now, there is something important to mention, and it is that we are covering the first section of the article in which he is presenting, well, a little bit of the biography of James and how this concept of homelessness um, appears throughout the novel and provides like this, let's say, really original novel. And we have this notion that homelessness is linked to property, authority, gender, and modernity. We'll see that since James couldn't settle in a place after a while until he finally did it in England, he carried a lot of that sense of being alienated to the context, being, let's say, powerless and having no authority or property over a place. And that'll apply throughout the novel. So we have the plot overview. We start with a character named Douglas, which is at with some other people around a fire. They are sharing ghost stories, and he mentions that he has a manuscript written by a former governess. He goes for it, and he starts reading it. And well, we have that the governess arrives at Bly to care for Miles and Flora. She's supposed not to disturb the uncle of these kids, and she's basically taking care of them until she encounters a ghost, the ghost of Peter Quint and Miss Jessel. But let's say like the main ghost will be Peter Quint, and the novel will be surrounded by that, right? By that sense of the ghost appearances. If the kids, especially Miles, is seeing the ghost of Quint, because Quint had, let's say, a bad influence over him when he was alive. And basically, it continues until the novella culminates in Miles's death. So that leads us to the concept of homelessness and this background information from the life of James. Well, James lived between America and Europe before settling in England. Davidson basically just presents that this displacement influenced his work, and that this displacement is provides a metaphorical homelessness in which his characters, mainly the governess, has no sense of property or authority over her presence at Bly or during the events of the story. So the governess is basically just mirroring that lack of belonging and that lack of authority. And that leads us to the governess figure. In this novel, well, mainly in general, we had this notion of the governess, in which basically they were women who were taken out of their homes due to economic reasons, in which they had to go to a wealthier house and basically just take care of the kids or be in charge of specific sections or tasks. And they always had like this sense of not belonging to those places. We'll discuss this more in depth in when we will discuss the governance figure. sorry, the governess novel. And in this case, in this novel, we see that the governess occupies an unstable social position. She is neither a servant nor a family member. She has like no sense of authority over the place. Basically, she doesn't know like her specific tasks well defined. She's just told that she should take care the niece and nephew the of her boss, and that she should not disturb him. And that's basically it. So this governance is dependent on a wealthier household, which does not provide her like any sense of property in this case, and that she's just like an extension. She's just like another object that is part of it. And considering all this in mind, we can perceive it as a symbol of displacement and uncertainty that is highly linked to James's life, and that will provide a really refreshing novel in the governance genre. And we have this notion of property and authority. Keeping that in mind, everything that I mentioned about the governess, we have this quote by Davidson, which says, open quote, "The governess has no right to a sense of property," end of quote. In that case, it is basically just the same idea I've been explaining, that throughout the novel, she she is like subdued to all the events, to everything that is happening. She has no influence over the ghost appearances. She cannot even interact like directly in some of the cases, and um, that's basically like the main idea of it. Now we have some more information that is linked to that, like the case of Bly, right? That at first it appears to be under her control. We have this quote, right, about that she feels like the place is so beautiful that she has like an almost sense of property, but at the end she has no influence over Bly. And well, her authority depends entirely on the uncle's absence. And probably we remember that we discussed throughout the course that ghosts are not just ghosts, right? They are not just beings from the underworld or from other world. They basically help us they basically help us identify in novels something that the rational part of our mind cannot cannot face, right? So they are exposing that, let's say, hidden, sometimes emotional, sometimes irrational, that hidden section of our mind that we cannot face, right? So in this case, the ghost exposes the fragility of her authority, and that is evident, right? Whenever she interacts or whenever she's in a scene um, with the ghost. And this is the quote I mentioned, right? That she says, "I could take a turn into the grounds and enjoy almost with a sense of property," but just with a sense. And Davidson emphasizes this word almost because it reveals her lack of true ownership and belonging. So, keeping that in mind, we can continue with the governess novel. And we have a traditional pattern, right? That we have this isolated governess that basically just has to go to a household. She usually, right, falls in love with the man in charge, right? With this aristocratic man that is in charge. And throughout the novel, we are developing that, right? And usually there's a sense of social mobility because she tends to marry that man. And behind all of that, there is like a restoration of order, right? In these cases, the governess tends to restore the order of her life. And James did something interesting, that he adopted the form but rejected the ending. And we can compare this with um like with Jane Eyre, and with the um organization of the novel. So we have like in this traditional Gothic novels, governess novels. The order is restored, the mystery is solved, the home is secured, everything goes perfectly fine, in quotation marks, right? At the end, but the turn of the screw does not agree with this, right? So we can compare it with Jane Eyre. Well, basically, Davidson does that. So probably you've all read Jane Eyre. You know that, well, she starts working as a governess. She falls in love with Mr. Rochester, right? And she leaves, right? She tries to get her life in order by her own. Then she realizes that this mystery of, the wife of Mr. Rochester, basically that his interaction with his wife led to an almost fatal accident in which he basically just, well, he almost ended up dead, right? So she realizes about that. Mr. Rochester is, well, he's even blind, right? And in that case, she comes back, she marries him, she actually takes care of him, and we could say that she governs over him. We could say it like that as well. And in that, let's say, novel, we have like the full plot and ending of this governess novel. So the order is restored, the mystery is solved. In that case, the mystery is, what happened with his wife and all of that, right? And the home is secured. She's back. Jane Eyre is back. She takes care of Mr. Rochester, and quote unquote happy ending, right? But in the turn of the screw, things go a little bit different. Yes, we have a governess that arrives at a household, but in this case, she has no connection with the owner, right? The uncle of the kids, he cannot be disturbed, right? He basically just is a character that is just mentioned, okay? And the novel is basically just about the novella is basically just about the governess taking care of the kids, facing these ghosts, right? And at the end, we can see that with the death of Miles, that is not the expected ending, right? That we should be having. She's not marrying Miles's uncle. She's not restoring any order. She's actually kind of losing all order, right? Because, well, Miles dies, like, quote unquote, her mission, right? The person she should be taking care of dies when he identifies that that is the ghost of Quint. And that's it. That's it, right? There is no explanation. There is no closure. Miles just dies, and that is the ending we have. So it's actually pretty interesting if we compare it with the traditional Gothic and the governess novel, because yes, we have like the like some similar components, but James provided like this new sense, right? Like this new way of presenting all of that. And keeping in mind the thesis, basically just what Davidson mentioned, that might have been influenced by James's homelessness sense of homelessness, right? In which he can put all of that into the novel, in which the governess has no authority, she has no way to influence the environment, and as someone that has lived abroad and someone that has lived from one place to another, even in Costa Rica, that that is a feeling. That is a feeling sometimes. So all of that leads to this proto-modernism idea, the proto-modernist idea of the novel. And Davidson, throughout the last section of that first part, he argues that the novella anticipates modernism because the novella is providing that ambiguity, right? As I just mentioned before, there's like no closure, no ending, like a direct or explicit one. Throughout the novel, we see that everything is really ambiguous. The appearances of the ghost, And we also have some fragmentation. We have these fragmentation included in the novel. There's a sense of unreliability regarding the narrator and the narration itself. There's a whole debate on the figure of the governess, and there's this epistemological uncertainty, right? That that uncertainty per se was actually something really refreshing and original at the time of the novel, and like all of those notions for Davidson basically just provide like the evidence that this could be considered as proto-modernist. Okay, and basically just following that sense of ambiguity and reliable narration and all of that, we have like this debate that we have the apparationists that basically just share the whole idea that in the story like ghosts are real and that the governess is doing the best she can. She's struggling with all of this, she's taking care of the children. And we have the anti-apparitionist, which basically just say that the ghosts are imagined by the governess, and that she actually ends up killing Miles, and that the whole story is just like a way to justify herself and just a way to present everything in a convenient manner, right? So that ambiguity and that irresolvable way of presenting the novel is something that was really original and that basically just provides that sense of um, being something beyond modernism, right? Like something, sorry, that presents modernism, right? This proto-modernist idea. And we basically just end up that we can interpret Bly as a place that appears secure but becomes psychologically unstable. Bly could be like that materialization of what is happening in the novel and with the governess, right? That at the beginning everything seems to be fine. She has like this like almost a sense of property, and then things complicate. The place by itself and the house by itself also take a turn in throughout the novel, right? Throughout the novella, right? We have those changes in the description and everything, and that basically just symbolizes that sense of homelessness within the home itself. That even you were supposed to be born there. You were sorry, you were if you I'm talking about my experience, right? You were supposed to be born in one place in one country, but sometimes if you move from one place to another, you might feel that you don't belong even to that neighborhood, to that country, to that place. And well, I kind of feel like I kind of identify with that. Okay, and these are the works cited. Thank you very much for your attention. And that's everything related to my presentation.